Winning a football game is tough to do, but we've all seen many games where a team won, and our collective reaction is that they didn't deserve it. While that may be harsh, it is also true, and some teams have excelled at winning many games in the same season that they didn't deserve. Today we're going to be looking at the 10 teams in the Super Bowl era with the most fraudulent records based on their overall performance for that season. Now this is a little different from our typical ranking style video. We use our own metric here, C-score, to determine a team's overall quality. But as we can see here, one of the components we use is results. If two teams are otherwise equal everywhere, but one team has a better record, that team will rate out higher in C-score. But based on this component alone, we have devised this list. Each team's C-score will be listed, but only as a reference point. This isn't a ranking of the worst teams. That's a video we have already done that you should watch if you haven't yet. The 1976 Tampa Bay Buccaneers were terrible, but their 0-14 record is appropriate. Had they been the same team, yet somehow gone 4-10, then their record would be considered fraudulent. It should be noted just how important the context of each individual season is in making these determinations. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoy. On with the countdown. We begin at number 10 with the 1978 Baltimore Colts. It should be noted that this was the first season that the NFL went to a 16-game schedule, and all teams in our top 10 are going to be from 1978 and onward. It's just easier to come up with a fraudulent record when you get to play more games. This team went 5-11. They had a 4-3 record in one-score games, but their point differential was minus 182, and their C-score was negative 24.036. In 1978, 5 teams won as many games as the Colts did, or fewer, yet no team was even within 50 points of that negative 182 point differential. Not even the putrid 2-14 San Francisco 49ers. No other team in the league, again including the Niners, were even within 70 points of the Colts' 421 allowed. Baltimore's first 2 games saw them lose by a combined 80-0. So while it may be odd to say that even a record as bad as 5-11 is flattering and fraudulent, that's exactly what this team did. Next up at number 9, we once again take a look at the Colts, this time from their days in Indianapolis in 1993, a season where they went 4-12, winning 3 of those games by 1 score, getting a negative 189 in point differential, their C-score just missing, falling as far as minus 30. Only 2 teams matched or did worse than the Colts in 1993. The Redskins did the same, but with a minus 115 point differential, while the Bengals were 1 game worse with a negative 132 point differential. Baltimore, again, was minus 189, and they won 3 of their games by the exact same score of 9-6. For all those games to fall in their favor is just better than a 10% chance. 4-12 is a bad record, and it got Indy the second pick in the next season's draft, but it could have, and probably should have, been so much worse. We now move on to number 8 and the 2003 Arizona Cardinals, who went 4-12 with all 4 of those victories coming by a single score. This was more of an exciting team. They added Emmitt Smith in the offseason, and Anquan Boldin was a revelation at receiver, but they were still terrible with a minus 227 point differential. Their C-score happened to be minus 31.231. 3 other teams in 2003 finished with a 4-12 record besides the Cardinals. The average point differential for those 3 teams was negative 127, exactly 100 points better than what the Cardinals achieved. They won their 4 games by a total of 14 points. They lost 7 different games by at least that same total. They couldn't win a single game away from the desert. with 6 of those 8 losses by double digits. If this was the first 0-16 team in NFL history, nobody would have batted an eyelash, as they finished last in the league in both points scored and points allowed, yet they somehow won 4 times. We're getting pretty modern here. At number 7 are the 2021 Atlanta Falcons. This was the first season where the NFL moved to a 17-game schedule, and the Falcons went 7-10. All 7 of their victories were by 1 score, with only 2 losses. A negative 146 point differential, terrible for a team only 3 games below 500, and their C-score reflects that, pushing up against minus 20. 7 teams finished the 2021 season with a point differential of negative 100 or worse. Outside of the Falcons, the other 6 teams finished the season with an average win total of just under 4, yet Atlanta found its way to 7, and yes, every single one of those wins were by 1 possession. An easy exercise would be to flip that total, then they'd be an unlucky 2-15 rather than a lucky 7-10. It's the fact that 100% of their 7 wins were by a combined 33 points that makes this 7-10 record fraudulent. We're staying in the same season at number 6, the 2021 Las Vegas Raiders, with a record that reflected Atlanta's at 10-7. They won 7 games by 1 score. Despite being 3 games over 500, they were outscored on the season by 65 points, and their C-score was minus 6.517. It's situations like these where the word fraudulent really comes into play. We looked at the Raiders' C-score, and yes, it was around minus 6.5. 9 different teams had a higher C-score than the Raiders, including the Colts by nearly 15 points, that still missed the playoffs. Yet this team did make the playoffs, and they deserved to because their record was such that they earned their way in. But that record was still fraudulent, with 4 straight wins by 12 total points to end the season, and that's what we're calling out today. We shift to the top half of the countdown, but we stay with the same franchise. At number 5 in 2009 are the Oakland Raiders, who went 5-11, garnering all of their victories by 1 score and getting blasted by a difference of 182 points in point differential, and that C-score down at negative 25.561. 5 teams in 2009 won between 3 and 5 games outside of the Raiders. Their average point differential was under 120, while the Raiders came in at 50% worse. In a season where there were 2 truly awful teams in the Lions and the historically terrible Rams, the Raiders weren't all that far behind them. But even the Lions managed to score 200 points, whereas the Raiders did not. In 7 of their 16 games, they failed to score over 10 points, and yet another team who managed each and every one of their victories by a single possession. Moving on to number 4 now are the 2011 Kansas City Chiefs, who pulled off a 7-9 record somehow, going 6-4 in one-score games, so they actually got 1 solid victory, but they were still outscored by 126 points, and their C-score just missed being negative 20 by less than a point, despite only being 2 games under 500. A great indicator that this team wasn't as good as their record said they were is what happened to them the next season, where they fell to a more appropriate 2-14. Only 3 teams had a worse point differential than the Chiefs, and those teams combined to win just 8 games, whereas the Chiefs managed those 7 on their own. Credit to them, their 1 win by multiple possessions was a 28-point shutout, and they did end the Packers' undefeated season in Week 15. But make no mistake, 2-14 was closer to this team's true output than 7-9 was. Our third most fraudulent record comes to us from the 2000 Cleveland Browns, who went 3-13. 2-1 in one-score games, meaning they got blown off the field quite a bit, and that shows in this horrific point differential, minus 258, and that C-score closer to minus 40 than it is to minus 30 at minus 36.678. 3-13 is the worst record that made it onto this list, and to have done so at number 3 is pretty amazing. The 4 expansion teams of the free agency and salary cap era, including the Browns, averaged a negative point differential of 132, with 220 being the worst output and dragging that average down by the same Browns team. The winless Browns from 2017 were outscored by 176 points. The winless Lions from 2008 were outscored by 249 points. Do you recall what the 2000 Browns did? Outscored by 258 points, topping them all. We're now at number 2, but this is our 3rd time looking at a Colts team. This one from 1992, the season before our number 9 entry, where they went 9-7, 6-1 in one-score games. Despite being 2 games over 500, they were still outscored by negative 86 points. And while that record is above average, the C-score is well below, hovering around negative 16. The Colts were coming off an absolutely terrible 1991 season, one of the worst on record in the Super Bowl era. Sure, they improved in 92, but not to the point where they were an actual winning team, even though that is what they pulled off. They won their last 5 games by a combined 20 points, whereas they lost 4 separate games by at least that same amount. They won 2 different games by only scoring 6 points in each game, a testament to their defense for sure, but those wins were against teams with 6 combined victories. And now we're at number 1, and this should be no surprise given the recency of it and given our thumbnail. The 2022 Minnesota Vikings, who went 13-4, an astonishing and unrepeatable 11-0 in one-score games, 9 games over 500, yet they were outscored on the season by 3 points. Their C-score is actually in the positive range, 2.081, but to be 13-4 with a C-score that mediocre tells you about their fraudulence. One thing we can say about this Vikings team is that their fraudulence was recognized to a degree throughout the football media as it was happening. Their 4 losses came by a combined 89 points, an average of over 22 per game. Their 13 wins came by a combined 86 points, fewer than 7 per game. This takes an astounding amount of luck, which caught up to them once they made the playoffs when they lost to a below-average team in the New York Giants, sporting a negative 0.639 C-score themselves. And it's also reflected in their 8-9 record the season before and their 7-10 record the season after. Thank you so much for making it this far into the video. I certainly hope that you liked it and that you found the time to quickly hit that thumbs up button. Feel free to share the video with as many people as you'd like, and to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Ding that bell so you can be notified about all future videos. One team I thought would be on this list was the 1989 Green Bay Packers, who famously won 4 games by a single point. They were contenders, but they otherwise went 3-3 in one-score games, and at 10-6 actually had a positive point differential, whereas the Vikings couldn't do that despite being above 500 by 5 more games. Are there any other teams you thought would be here? Did you think I took it too hard on some of the teams that were here? Sound off on these thoughts or any other thoughts that you may have down in the comments section below. Thank you once again for watching, and until next time, I hope you have an awesome day.